Hello and welcome to the Aletheia Initiative YouTube channel. My name is Shane Himes, and today we are going to be taking a deep dive into the Barbie film. So if you have been looking for critical engagement with the film's themes and message, then you are in the right place. What has made this film so unique? Why is it such a hot topic of conversation? It's due to make over $1 billion, and interpretations of the film range from it's a great egalitarian message of equality between men and women, to it's an accidentally conservative film because the arguments are so bad, to it's just a piece of feminist nonsense that should hopefully be ignored by the young women to whom it is marketed to. So where does the truth lie? We're hopefully going to investigate that and come to a conclusion by the end of this review. As far as the movie goes, I would say that Barbie is one of the worst films I have ever watched. And I say that reluctantly because I am a fan of the brand, just in the sense of it has been aspirational and inspirational for millions of young girls. It has made the childhoods of millions of young girls better, including my 4-year-old daughter, who is a massive fan of Barbie, the brand, including the dolls and obviously the cartoons on Netflix. So there's a lot of young girls who love Barbie, and for good reason. It has shown young girls that they could be maybe anything they want to be. They could be a doctor, they could be a lawyer, they could be a president, like the movie tells us. I almost feel bad for saying that the film is not very good. But then I think about the fact that the brand of the film and the brand of Barbie, what the film thinks Barbie should be and what Barbie actually is, those things are at odds with one another. So I guess I don't feel too bad about saying that the film is not great, because it's really not consistent with the legacy of Barbie. The film goes after the legacy of Barbie, but we will talk about that in due time. Now, before we get into the obvious social and political commentary that the film makes, I would like to discuss maybe some of the positive aspects of the film. So first of all, it's a well done film in the sense of production, acting, aesthetics, its originality even in some respects. So the film is not all bad. And when I say it's one of the worst films I've ever watched, that's in large part due to the messaging and the plot. It's not anything to do with the production of the film. The cast is fantastic. Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, and the rest. Barbie Land is aesthetically pleasing. And I think that the movie overall is very entertaining. If for nothing else, then it is an idiosyncratic movie, just in the sense of it's different from a lot of other films that we see today. There's a lot of superhero movies. There's a lot of Disney remakes. And so anytime you get a truly original film, even though Barbie, it's not original because Barbie has been a brand for a long time. But as far as movies go, and Barbie Land being depicted in the way that it is an original film in some respects anyway. And so it's rather entertaining. I think that it is rather humorous overall, and that the flow of the movie is great. The flow of the movie is great because if you're watching the film and you haven't completely suspended any semblance of cognitive thought, if you haven't completely suspended the journey toward logical coherence in your mind, then you may be tempted to ask some questions about what's going on in the movie. For example, there's one stereotypical Barbie, Margot Robbie. But there's only one of her in Barbie Land, but there's millions in the real world. So off the top of my head, I'm thinking, okay, is this Barbie supposed to be representative of all of the Barbies in the real world? And that's why there's only one of her in Barbie Land? And if that's the case, then why is she only affected by the particular thoughts and feelings and drawings of one particular woman in the real world? You could also ask about the world, the Barbie Land itself, and its connection to the real world. People can go back and forth between Barbie Land and the real world, and you might be tempted to ask how. What exactly is the connection? What precisely is the relationship between Barbie Land and the real world? What is the relationship precisely between a Barbie and a woman in the real world? But honestly, the film is better off not getting distracted by those questions because it is a Barbie film. It's for kids, something we'll talk about in a minute. So I think that makes the flow of the film good. It's content to not take itself too seriously. It just establishes what it is, and it goes with what it is, at least aesthetically and ontologically and metaphysically. It's not going to be coherent in those regards as far as ontology and metaphysics are concerned, but that's okay because this movie is not intended for philosophers. So then the question remains, if the movie is not intended for philosophers, and it's a good thing that you can just suspend your brain for a second when you're watching the film, at least as far as that stuff goes, then who is the film for? Well, the film is intended clearly for young girls and their moms. You could probably include college age and teenage girls that used to play with Barbies as well into that target demographic. But yes, children are certainly included in the target audience of this film. How do we know this? Well, we know this, from the trailer. Have you watched the trailer? The trailer depicts the movie as kind of a lighthearted, wholesome experience. Depicts the people in the film as goofy. I mean, it's a kid's aesthetic in the trailer. As well, you have Margot Robbie saying that everyone is invited to the film, that it's one giant pie and everyone can get a slice of that pie. It's one giant party that Margot Robbie says. She uses the party analogy and everyone is invited. Greta Gerwig, the director, has said something similar in various interviews. So the lead actress has said that the movie is for everyone. The director has said the movie is for everyone. The trailer clearly depicts the film as being for everyone, including children. And then last but not least, you have the previews. The previews, if you've seen the movie, you know. It's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's the Trolls. It's the new Duck movie from Illumination. They are mostly, if not all, cartoons that are rated G or PG. And this is important because marketing companies that are behind those other movies know exactly who is supposed to be in the theater watching the film that these previews are made for. So marketing companies, director, lead actress, everyone seems to think that the movie is intended for young kids at minimum, and everyone else, but especially for kids. This is at odds with some on the internet who have tried to argue that the film is rated PG-13. So clearly the film was not meant for little girls and their moms. Obviously not, because it's rated PG-13 for sexual innuendo and language and whatever else. So if you took your daughter to the movie to see this film, then that's on you. Of course, this is one of the main issues that you'll start off with in the film. So if you're looking for a first issue with the film, it's that it clearly did not market itself as being what it really is. Because what it really is, if you've seen it, is a fourth wave feminist diatribe against modern society. It is a message to women everywhere that they are oppressed and men are to blame. Women cannot get ahead in the world because of men. Men are the problem. This is the message of the film. Of course, if the film were marketed that way, then of course it would have never done as well as it has. They were disingenuous in the marketing. And I think any honest person evaluating what has happened could tell you that. They did not want people to know before the film came out exactly what this film was. They wanted moms to think, well, the trailer looks like it's for kids. The director says it's for kids. The lead actress says it's for kids. The marketing companies say it's for kids. It's Barbie. So, yeah, I'm probably going to take my kid to the theater. A PG-13 rating is not going to keep most parents away. There's a lot of parents that have 8, 9-year-old kids who they would not mind if they went to a PG-13 movie. So, yeah, they were disingenuous with the marketing. They knew what they were doing. But why? Well, it was obviously a smart move on their part. They knew that if they marketed the movie as being overtly leftist, then the movie would have failed at the box office. At bare minimum, would not have done nearly as well as it has. And we know this because of the failures of past overtly leftist films that have marketed themselves as such, where everyone knows either there's a gay character in Lightyear or Strange World or whatever that movie was called that flopped from Disney and Pixar. They've had several of them lately that have been overtly leftist, somewhat kid films, and they fail at the box office because leftism is antithetical to family. Leftism is antithetical to nature. Parents, especially, if you have kids, they know this intuitively, at least most parents do, and that's why they don't take their kids to see films that have been overtly marketed in such terms. I think the movie studios, the directors, at least in this instance, are starting to pick up on that, and so they hid exactly what it was. Because the other films, even though they may have just had a little blip here or there, the entire Barbie movie is centered around leftist imaginations surrounding patriarchy, which we'll get to in just a minute. So if they would have marketed the film as Barbie overcoming the patriarchy and women are oppressed by men, it would not have done super well. So the main problem then is that you have millions of mothers who are taking their daughters to this film unsuspectingly expecting a wholesome, lighthearted, great experience with their daughters where they could perhaps get some popcorn and cry together and have a good time. That's what they expected, but then when they got into the theater, they quickly realized after the movie starts that, this is not a Barbie movie in any sense that we expected. This is a fourth wave feminist diatribe against society. So there you go. That's the first problem, and that is a legitimate problem. So how do we interpret the film? As I mentioned before, there are multiple interpretations. There's positive, egalitarian interpretations of the movie. I've seen some Christian professors will point out one here in just a minute that have tried to offer such an interpretation. They say that the movie is simply pointing out that when any one gender opposes the other and oppresses the other, then that's not a world that anyone should want to live in. And so, see, it's just about equality. That's all Barbie world, Barbie land is about. It's about achieving equality. That's what the Barbie film is supposed to do, is tell everybody we've got to be equal. Of course, if this were the case, then that would be a good message. It just would be an unnecessary one and a redundant one. It would be like me giving a message against slavery in the West. We don't have slaves. Women are not oppressed. These are not things that happen in modern Western societies. So, it would be a redundant message, but at the same time, I guess I would agree with it. But the problem is, as we will see in this review, this an egalitarian interpretation of the film, which seems to be popular among some in the Christian world and really just in the culture at large, I don't think that it is a feasible interpretation. And so let's get into why that is. The movie begins with a reference to the 2001 film A Space Odyssey. You've got this giant Barbie that appears onto the scene, and at the time, these little girls had these baby dolls that they were playing with. Of course, before Barbie, all they had was baby dolls. And so the only thing that little girls could do was pretend to be mothers, which of course is horrible. We can't have little girls pretending to just be mothers. There has to be something else. And so Barbie shows these little girls that they can be other things. which again, in and of itself is not a bad message, but it doesn't end there. You see, what happens is those little girls, they take their their baby dolls after they have figured out that they could play with Barbie and do other things, and they slam their baby dolls' heads against the rocks. This is not an exaggeration. This is not hyperbole. This literally happens in the scene. If you haven't seen the movie, they get the baby dolls, they slam their heads against rocks, and in some cases the heads even crack open. And so it is a terrible scene to start off with. I mean, it's one thing, again, to tell the girls that they could just play with something else and do something else if they so choose to. But the message is not just that they can do something else. It's that they should do something else. It's that they should not want to be mothers. I don't know how else to interpret it when you have a scene where they are slamming baby dolls' heads against rocks. It's actually pretty terrible to watch. My wife and I both had a terrible feeling in our stomach after that moment in the film. And so I have to say here that one of the points I'm going to make in this review is that the film is at least somewhat anti-motherhood, and we'll nuance that in just a minute. But one Christian professor in particular I wanted to look at. She's a professor at Wheaton. Let's see if I can get it pulled up here. She is a professor at Wheaton, and she is just one example, so I'm not trying to single her out, but pretty well known. This is on the Holy Post website. I think that the Phil guy that created VeggieTales runs this. At least he's on the front page. Anyway, it's a popular site that a lot of Christians read for takes on culture and whatnot. And this reviewer actually says here, because of a certain statement that is made by the ghost of Ruth Handler, who we'll talk about later in the review, she, like Ruth Handler, for example, she tells Barbie right here on the screen that their daughters can look back and see how far they've gone. Mothers stop so that their daughters can look back and see how far they've gone. And because of this statement and some others in the film which do pretty much say that, you should be a good mother to your daughter, that mothers do a lot for their daughters. Yes, there are some of those statements in the film. Certainly, I'm not trying to deny that. But because of this statement, this reviewer, let's see, Amy Peeler is her name, Dr. Peeler. She says that this should disarm you of any idea that the film might be anti-motherhood. So the film is not anti-motherhood according to Dr. Peeler. Of course, well, and let's just pull it up one more time because this is an important point. When you go here and you see her description of the opening of the film, you'll notice a glaring detail is missing in the review. She talks about the giant Barbie, you see it here, the picture and all that, and about the little girls playing with dolls, and then they find out that the little girls' imaginations were expanded and they don't have to just be mothers. They could be doctors or lawyers or presidents. She says all of that here, but then she just moves on, which is hilarious because you can make no mistake about it. Yes, the film could have just had the girls putting the dolls down and then playing with other things, but the film explicitly, because obviously it is fourth wave feminism nonsense, feminist nonsense. The film doesn't just have them put the dolls down, it has them bash their heads against rocks, saying you don't need to be a mother, you shouldn't want to be a mother, you should want to do these other things more, these other things are better. That's obviously the message. And I suppose that's why Dr. Peeler did not include that detail in her review. It would be rather hard to argue that a film is not anti-motherhood when at the same time you just a few paragraphs earlier described such a terrible scene. I don't think you could say the film is pro-motherhood by any means. I think the best way, given some of the other statements in the film that do come across perhaps to some as being pro-motherhood, the best way to articulate the film's position on motherhood is that, if you happen to be a mother already, then yeah, you should be a good one. You should love your daughter. So that's good, I suppose. But motherhood itself is not something that young girls should strive for. So that's the best way to put it. Motherhood is not something to strive for, but if you happen to be a mother, you probably should be a good one. Of course, telling young girls that motherhood is not something they should strive for is not a great message. It cuts against nature again, and it's one of the reasons why leftism is conceived as being anti-family, because if you are anti-motherhood, if you tell little girls that they shouldn't want to be mothers, they shouldn't strive to be mothers, then that's an anti-family message. Of course, this is not the only reason. This is not the only thing in the film that would lead you to believe that there are at least anti-motherhood subtleties in the film. There's one pregnant Barbie doll, and you just see her a couple of times. She's not mentioned too much. It's just some one-off jokes, but the jokes are not very funny. I mean, in my mind anyway, and I think that they are there for a very specific purpose. The Barbie that's pregnant, she is deemed to be ugly and disgusting. Later on, I know at least one instance for sure where the men that we'll talk about later, who are the board of directors of the Mattel company, they go to Barbie Land, led by Will Ferrell, and they are disgusted at the sight of this pregnant Barbie. Now, you may look at that and, I mean, I don't know what you would say about that other than it's just terrible. It's obviously laying the foundation for the message anyway, that being pregnant is not really great. Being pregnant is kind of disgusting. I mean, I don't know how else you would interpret the message of men being repulsed by a pregnant Barbie and her being discarded. They said, they discontinued her, and, a couple other jokes. So anyway, there's other things we could talk about, and we'll talk about the ending, of course, when we get there, which is also part of the anti-motherhood subtleties that are in the film. The ending's not so subtle, but we'll get there. Anyway, plenty of reasons to think that at bare minimum, the film is not pro-motherhood. It is anti-motherhood, and that's a very important message to get to people who maybe haven't seen this movie. You're thinking about taking your daughter to see it, or you want to talk to your daughter about the film. It's not a good thing to tell little girls that they shouldn't strive for motherhood. It's a beautiful thing. It's a miracle from God, and it's the greatest gift of all, life. So yeah, it is actually something we should strive for. We should strive as men to be fathers. Women should strive to be mothers, so long as they're physically able and obviously have a partner. All right, fast forward, and the audience is shown the Barbie Land for the first time. The Barbies are happy. Barbie Land is a matriarch. Women control everything. Only the Barbies own houses, serve in government. Only they do even the construction. So they do all the jobs. They're the leaders. They're everything. They have the white-collar jobs. They have the blue-collar jobs. I mean, they do everything. And the Kens, really what the Kens do, they're somewhat happy, but they really just sit on the beach. The Kens don't really have much that they're doing. They're obviously portrayed as incompetent and fools. And they only have good days if Barbie notices them. So the Kens, they don't really have much of a purpose other than just to notice Barbie. But again, here we get to one of the important reasons why the disingenuous marketing was so important. So you get to the beach and the Kens are cheering and the women are playing volleyball and the Kens are trying to get the attention of the Barbies. And at one point, Ryan Gosling, and I forget the guy's name, he plays in Shang-Chi, he's a great actor. But anyway, he's another Ken, and they start getting after it because they both want the stereotypical Barbie's attention. And so we are then privy to public masturbation jokes as a result of this feud. Yes, the Barbie film that has lured mothers and their 8-year-old daughters into the film has now made public masturbation jokes. The Kens tell each other that they are going to beach each other off. Several times, 5 or 6 times, when I'm watching it, I'm thinking this is eventually going to lead to a dance-off or something, because beach each other off hopefully doesn't mean what you're thinking, but no, it really is just that, because there's no dance-off or anything. Margot Robbie eventually breaks them up. I just point this out to say, more wholesome content for mothers and their daughters. Eventually, Barbie begins to change. Barbie begins to ask questions about death. She has feelings of despair. In her mind, she becomes maybe less attractive. There's a kind of a cute joke again where Barbie has feet that are shaped as though they're going to be in heels, and because of these changes that she's experiencing, she has flat feet. These jokes don't overstay themselves, overstay their welcome. They're pretty cute, just like in Barbie Land, where Barbie was drinking something out of a cup, but there's nothing in it, or she's taking a shower and no water actually comes out of the shower head because it's Barbie Land. Kind of cute jokes. They don't overstay their welcome, like I said, so it's part of the good flow of the film. But Barbie goes to now Weird Barbie. Weird Barbie is a Barbie that has been ostracized from society because she is weird and ugly. That is how she is described. She has been played with too hard in the real world, and so now she just kind of sits on the outskirts of Barbie Land. But the other Barbies know that if they ever have one of these problems where there's something happening to them and they're being affected by their relationship to the real world, then they can go to Weird Barbie and Weird Barbie will give them advice. So Barbie goes to Weird Barbie and Weird Barbie basically says, you got to go to the real world and find the girl who's playing with you too hard and help her out and basically tell her, you can't keep doing this. So Ken, Ryan Gosling, the stereotypical Ken that's made for stereotypical Barbie, he sneaks into the backseat and goes with her to the real world. So now we're in the real world. We've left Barbie Land and the movie is making obvious connections between the real world in the Barbie film and our world, reality. The real world is supposed to be perhaps a slightly hyperbolic version of our world. So Ken and Barbie arrive, and upon arriving, they have their Barbie-themed clothes on, so they comically stand out in this regard. Everyone is looking at them. Of course, Barbie is still very attractive, and so the men are gawking at her. The men are also looking at Ken weird, but for some reason, Ken thinks that he is being admired here. This is one of those scenes that just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because there's no reason to believe the men are admiring Ken here. He's wearing a weird pink outfit from Barbie Land 2, so he's just getting, kind of made fun of by the guys, I guess. But for some reason, he thinks he's being admired. It really doesn't matter because here the film's purpose is to establish that when you are in the real world and you are a woman, you are susceptible to harassment. And if you're a man, you just get acknowledged. You get admired. That's the message anyway. That's the initial message you get about the real world. It doesn't just stop at gawking, though, for the men. The men, there's actually one guy who runs up to Barbie and slaps her on the butt. In 2023. So here is, we'll get to that in a minute. So he slaps her on the butt, and basically this is the point of emphasis about the real world. If you are in the real world and you're a woman, you can't even walk down the streets of LA without being sexually harassed. But if you're a man, you can walk down the street and everybody loves you. You're popular. You're great. That's the message of their initial arrival. Men, as Ken realizes very quickly, men rule the world. Barbie realizes that, people are looking at her in ways she doesn't like. They're touching her in ways she doesn't like. She just doesn't necessarily like being in the real world because she's finding out very quickly that the real world is oppressive to women, whereas Ken finds out that men rule everything. And so he sees that there are presidents on the U.S. currency. He looks at Mount Rushmore. Men make up a majority of the Supreme Court. So obviously the message is clear. Men rule the real world. And Ken loves the idea, and Barbie doesn't really love the idea, but she's much more concerned with finding this girl that she is looking for. So at this point, I've got to stop, and I've got to lay out a couple of disclaimers. I think that the absurdity is too much to ignore at this point in the film. The connections that it's trying to make to the real world. They're meant to deliver a real political message and a social message for our day, but they're not really grounded in any kind of reality. But before we get there, the disclaimer. This is a Barbie movie. And people, as a result of it being a Barbie movie, will say that, oh, you shouldn't take it too seriously. You can't really dig into the details. You can't do a review like the one we're doing now because it's a Barbie film. Don't take it too seriously. Just sit back and enjoy it. Ben Shapiro, of course, did the 40-something minute review where he was targeted, I guess you could say. The left, a lot of the leftist outlets did not like what he had to say, and they called him pathetic for spending 40-something minutes reviewing the Barbie film. Like, don't you have better things to do? Are you just so miserable that you would dedicate yourself to engaging the arguments of a Barbie movie? This is the dialectical game that the left plays. And honestly, it's really old. The left loves to play the game. They want to set the stage, and they want to make up the rules for that game, and then you have to play on their terms. So if the left, being Greta Gerwig in this instance, wants to roll out a 2-hour feminist diatribe against society and men, then they get to do that. But if you dare to engage the arguments, well, then you're just miserable. You're a freak. You need to find something better to do. Why are you engaging a Barbie movie? This is a classic leftist game. And those on the right, we need to stop allowing them to set the stage and determine the rules of engagement. If they want to roll out a 2-hour social and political commentary, leftist commentary on society, and give millions of young women the message that men oppress them and hate them, and that they can't get ahead in the world because of men, and men are the root of all of their problems, then yes, we get to respond. Do you think we want to respond? Do you think that we want to do in-depth reviews of the Barbie film? Well, of course not. I would much rather just take my daughter, have my wife take my daughter, and let them have a good time and come back and continue to live our lives. But the left has not allowed us to do that. They have infiltrated kids' shows. They've infiltrated movies. You can't even go see a Barbie film anymore without hearing 2 hours of patriarchal lectures. The patriarchy is this. The patriarchy is that. Women are oppressed in this way. Men are the problem. So no, we don't want to engage a Barbie film, but the left has left us no choice. It's either engage the Barbie film or just allow the Barbie film's message to go to millions of young girls unchallenged. Those are the options. And for a long time, conservatives took option number 2 and gave away every single institution and cultural area in our society. They lost every cultural battle for the last 50 years. And finally, people are sort of tired of that. But yeah, nonetheless, you got to push back against this stuff. And so we are. So first of all, I would say that you can't accept the premise that the details don't matter. I think the details don't matter in an ontological sense in this film because the film doesn't take its ontology too seriously. We've already covered that. It doesn't take itself too seriously in some regards, as it shouldn't. But then when it comes to the social and the political commentary, yes, of course, we have to take those comments seriously. Because the film takes those comments seriously. So what are the details? Well, for starters, there is no man in 2023 that is going to run up and hit a random girl that he does not know on the butt. That is never going to happen. Some may say that, well, this is just satire or hyperbole meant to prove a point. But the satire or the hyperbole has to be rooted in some sort of concrete reality in order to be an effective figure of speech. Otherwise, it's just made up whole cloth, and so it's not effective. This particular portion of the film is made up whole cloth. It is not related to anything in our modern society. This would never happen in a million years. If it did happen, the man was probably highly intoxicated and went to jail. Men do not just randomly in 2023 go up to women and do that. They shouldn't, obviously, but they don't. So that's one point of the film that's not based at all in reality. Now, the crude sexual remarks that Barbie has to endure, that may be effective hyperbole because, yes, obviously there are times where men will say things to women that they shouldn't say. Perhaps there's even times that they would look at women in ways that they should not look at them. That is true. But if that's the case, is that supposed to prove that women are lesser than men? Does it help to prove the patriarchy in some kind? Does it help to prove that women are oppressed? Well, no. Yes, sometimes people say things to women that they shouldn't say. That's not good. Sometimes women say things to men that they shouldn't say. So if a woman says something crude or rude to a man, does that mean that the man is oppressed by the woman? No, it doesn't. None of this proves a patriarchy. Sometimes people hear things that they don't want to hear. And sometimes people say things that they should not say. This is in no way proof of oppression. And it's certainly not proof that women have to endure this to an infinite degree more than men. They certainly don't endure the first part, the sexual harassment part by the random person. So what about the presidents? Well, the presidents were men, yes. Does that mean that women were oppressed just because men occupied the office of presidency? No. Again, that doesn't prove anything. Yes, men were president and have been president in the United States historically. That doesn't mean that every time a man was president that women were oppressed. Did presidents, some of them anyway, not fight wars in order to protect women? Is that not what war has historically been, at least somewhat? It is something that men do in order to protect women from actual tyranny and oppression, as opposed to fake 2023 patriarchy. Further, did some of those presidents not fight for women's rights? Were some of those presidents not responsible for what we now call first wave feminism, where women get the right to own property and where women get the right to vote and get more levels of independence, quote unquote? Well, yeah, some of those presidents were responsible for that. But even if none of that mattered, even if you weren't convinced by any of those arguments, they were in the past. This was all in the past. Something that happened in 1850 has nothing to do with you personally right now in your day-to-day life. Women now, they're in the highest forms of government. They have massive influence in law and in culture and in institutions. If Hillary Clinton was not the least likable political candidate in modern history, then we would most likely have a female president right now. Hillary Clinton is probably the only person, maybe outside of Kamala Harris, who can barely even poll at 2% in her own state in a Democratic primary, that could lose to Donald Trump in 2016, who was the second most unpopular political candidate in modern U.S. history. So we do have women in positions of authority, but is that what women really want? Is that what the feminists really want? Well, the answer is no. Feminists do not just want women on the Supreme Court. They don't just want a female or a woman in office. They want a leftist woman on the Supreme Court. They want a leftist female as a president. Ask a feminist how they would feel about a Candace Owens presidency. Of course, they would hate it. You remember when the Girl Scouts Twitter account had to take down a tweet congratulating Amy Coney Barrett on her appointment to the Supreme Court because of outrage from feminists online. They had to take down, the Girl Scouts had to take down a tweet congratulating a woman for being on the Supreme Court. So it's clear that the feminists don't just want a woman in the office. Marjorie Taylor Greene does not count as female representation in the government. Candace Owens would not count as female representation as a president because they are not leftist women. Which tells you that what the feminists really want is leftist women, and what they really, really want is leftism. That's what they want. And that's the message of this film, of the Barbie film, is that these presidents and these institutions that are led by men are not overtly leftist. Therefore, they are oppressive to women. Anything that is not overtly leftist to fourth wave feminists is oppressive to women. That's essentially the message. So no, they don't just want females in office. They would not be satisfied if it were 4 conservative women on Mount Rushmore any more than they are satisfied with it being 4 men on Mount Rushmore. So let's get back to the movie. Barbie and Ken, they eventually go to this school where Barbie thinks that the girl that's playing with her is. She has a vision, closes her eyes, and, figures it out. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but, we're not focusing on those details for good reason. So they go, and Barbie is excited to meet this girl named Sasha. She's excited to hear all about her experience with Barbie and how Barbie had maybe helped her to overcome some things and how Barbie had helped make her happier. But the problem is that Barbie, in Barbie Land, did not get the fourth wave feminist message. See, Barbie thought she had been helping girls, perhaps by being inspirational or aspirational, but in fact, 12-ish, 13-ish year old Sasha has something different to say to Barbie. See, Sasha says that Barbie has made all of the problems that women face in the world worse. She says that Barbie has set back the feminist movement 50 years, or the women's rights movement, however she puts it. She utterly degrades her. She talks down to her, and it culminates in her saying that Barbie was a driving force behind sexualized capitalism. And then the last insult she gives her is that she is now a fascist. So fascism, of course, being a word that has now officially lost all meaning and coherence because Hitler's a fascist. Barbie's a fascist. Hitler kills 11 million people. Barbie, unrealistic body expectations. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Fascism. It's the same thing. So hopefully we're now done with the word fascism as a society. I think that once 12-year-old girls start calling Barbie a fascist in the Barbie movie, it's probably time to move on from the word because no one has a clue what it means anymore. This is one of the most intriguing and important parts of the film, though, because it's at this point that the legacy of Barbie is placed squarely at odds with the vision of Barbie in the film. What the film wants Barbie to be and what Barbie actually has been are two different things. And I find this hilarious and ironic because throughout the entire film, men have been the problem. Men are weak. Men are incompetent. Men are oppressive. This is how the men are portrayed in the film. And yet, Barbie's legacy is that of sexualized capitalism and fascism. But who created Barbie? Ruth Handler, Mattel president, 1945 to 1975. She founded Barbie sometime in the 1950s. I forget the exact year. I think it was maybe 59. But Barbie's legacy, on one hand, is fascism and sexualized capitalism, but it was a female who founded Barbie and built Barbie and marketed Barbie and was the CEO of the company for about 20-ish or so years of Barbie's existence. So it is a female who is responsible for Barbie's legacy, at least largely responsible for Barbie's legacy of sexualized capitalism and fascism. which is even worse because Ruth Handler is portrayed later in the film as in a positive manner when she talks to Barbie. But this is a total incoherence Because you've just said that the legacy of Barbie is that of fascism and sexualized capitalism, unrealistic body expectations, making women's problems worse, and yet you're going to admire the person who created this legacy? Who created this Barbie? Total incoherence. I have no idea if Greta Gerwig thought this one through, if no one caught this, if they just didn't care. I don't know. Maybe they don't care how Ruth Handler would have received the movie if she were alive today. But that was just a good bit of irony there, that a female built a legacy of fascism and sexualized capitalism. So meanwhile, Ken is off learning about the real world. He discovers that men can do anything in the real world. So he's at the library, he's reading books, he's figuring out, men can do all these things. They have all these positions in the real world. And so he wants to participate in the patriarchy. And this next section of the film makes even less sense than pitting Barbie's legacy against Barbie, the vision in the Barbie movie, the vision of Barbie in the movie. This next part, I don't know exactly what Greta Gerwig is getting at here. I'm going to give my best guess, but it's not very well done. It's a very, very bad argument if it's trying to portray a patriarchy in the real world. So Ken will go to a few places and he will try to do an important job just because he's a man. So for example, he goes to this big business and he talks to the business executive and he says, "Hey, I want to be here. I want to sit on this board." And the guy's like, "Yeah, but you don't have an MBA. And some of our people even have PhDs, so you're probably going to need those things in order to come get a job here." And so Ken gets frustrated and he leaves. Next, I think he goes to a hospital, perhaps. I didn't take notes when I was watching the movie, so I apologize, but I think it was the hospital next. He goes in the hospital, and this time he is talking to a doctor. And Ken wants to do a couple of procedures. The doctor won't let him. He wants to be a doctor. The doctor won't let him. Of course, this time the doctor is a woman. So apparently this woman was able to overcome the patriarchy in this film, at least. So the woman tells Ken that you can't be a doctor here. You're going to need a lot more education, a lot more practice. And so Ken gets frustrated. He goes a couple of more places, but eventually realizes that he's not going to be able to participate properly in the patriarchy here in the real world. So he now intends to take the patriarchy back to Barbie Land. I have to pause here again and just ask, what is the message here? Is the message that you have to be skilled, that you have to have degrees in order to participate in the patriarchy in the real world? Or is it that you can be a man and just do it? I think the message here is that you have to do both. You have to be a man and have skills, but only a man can get those positions. Women are still excluded. I think that that's the interpretation that's probably the most plausible, because when Ken goes to the business executive, he says, again, can I have this job? And the business executive says no. And Ken says, but I thought you were practicing the patriarchy here. I thought that we were doing the patriarchy. And the guy goes, well, we are, but it's just not as obvious. We're just hiding it a little better now. So I guess the patriarchy is still here, despite the female doctor, but they're just hiding it behind skills and degrees. So that's just something else that the film is trying to do in portraying the patriarchy that falls flat on its face. So it's not based in any sort of reality that we live in, certainly. Even if it just in the film itself, none of these things would, of course, prove that women are oppressed in and of themselves just because they weren't business people. But anyway, the point is, it's not based on anything in our lives, in the reality that Greta Gerwig is trying to portray in a hyperbolic manner. How do we know this? Well, first of all, women earn more college degrees than men do in real life. So if the patriarchy is hiding behind degrees and qualifications, it's not doing a very good job, because the patriarchy is allowing women to get degrees more than men. In fact, and I've got this here, I will pull it up. Women now outnumber men in the college-educated labor force. So here we have women have overtaken men and now account for more than half of the college-educated labor force in the United States, according to a Pew Research Center analysis of government data. So women have now overtaken men in the college-educated workforce. They have more white-collar jobs now than men do. So, again, the film spewing nonsense. All of this to say, I have no idea how this particular portion of the film is supposed to portray a patriarchy in the real world, because it's not based in any kind of empirical data that we have. And plus there's a woman doctor there, and so she's not part of the patriarchy. Anyway, we'll move on, but just another piece of incoherence from the film. Meanwhile, Barbie is escorted to the Mattel headquarters. Basically, the CEO, Will Ferrell, don't know if he has a name, we just probably all call him Will Ferrell at this point in these movies. He says, we can't have Barbie being just running around without supervision. It's going to cause weird things in the world or something. It's not explained very clearly, but again, it's just one of those things. I don't think it's a bad thing that it's not explained. It makes the flow of the movie just fine, I think, because it's Barbie. Who cares? She doesn't need to be in the real world. She needs to be in Barbie world. We got to go take her to Barbie world. So they escort her. They find her because there's reports of a weird woman in a weird costume walking around wherever. And so they find her and they take her to the Mattel headquarters. Now, you can guess what Barbie sees at the Mattel headquarters. Even if you have never seen the film, I guarantee you can guess what's coming next. Yes, the entire board of directors at Mattel are men. And of course, they are incompetent men, but they're men. The whole thing, men. Now, what do you think the number of women is that are on the Mattel board? Mattel board of directors. Well, we can find out. Simple Google search here. Now, assuming that all of the women, or people who look like women, are women, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 women, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 men. So it's 6 to 5 men, and there is 1 woman with a PhD. So it's 1 PhD to 0 as far as the women to the men. Another just piece of the film that is not in any way rooted in reality. No, the Mattel board is not completely made up of male directors. It's probably just meant to be part of the theme of the film. They probably know that maybe there's 5 guys on the board of directors. Maybe they don't. I have no idea. But it's just one of those things. If it's supposed to reinforce the idea of a patriarchy in our world, it does a bad job because it picks a board of directors that has 5 women to 6 men, 1 0 on the PhDs that were mentioned earlier in the film. So of course, it's everything you imagine. The men are incompetent. Barbie gets away because of their ineptitude. And when Barbie gets away, she runs into Sasha from earlier, who gave her the lecture, and then Gloria, her mom. Now, her mom, Gloria, is the secretary for the Mattel board of directors. And we find out that she is actually the one who has caused all of these changes in Barbie. She had been anxious and she had been depressed in her life at that stage of her life. And so that's how she was drawing Barbie while she was at work. And apparently that's what has caused Barbie to change in Barbie Land. Now, quick point here. You might ask, well, do they have a dad and a husband? So Sasha and Gloria, where's the father? Well, when they are helping Barbie escape back to Barbie Land, they mention the dad. And they say, oh yeah, he'll be fine. And it goes to him just for like 5 seconds, being an idiot, can't speak Spanish, he's dumb, that kind of thing. And so it shows him one other time toward the end of the film, at the very end. And basically he's portrayed as a weak feminine, incompetent moron. That's what the dad is. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because when you look at the state of Gloria in the film, and when you look at Sasha, a 12-ish-year-old girl who gives random strangers lectures on fascism and sexualized capitalism and degrades someone that she doesn't even know, you might not be super proud of that 12-ish-year-old girl. At that particular moment in her life, she may be very troubled. And the mom, the wife, Gloria, is obviously very troubled about something. You just might think, if you're familiar with the social scientific data, of course, that perhaps the weak father, the weak husband, has something to do with this. The film obviously does not explore this, and it doesn't intend to convey this. It's just using him as yet another example of an incompetent man. But you can't help but wonder if a strong man, being a husband and a father, would have made the lives of Gloria and Sasha better. The film doesn't think so. The film thinks that men are the problem with everything. But it is a bit ironic. And, there is some data. I've got an article here that we could pull up real quick if you wanted to read it. It's a Forbes article. I've read through it. It's great. I would encourage you to read it. Basically, strong father-daughter relationships lead to healthier, happier women. And it goes through has some good links in it, makes some good points, cites some academics. Anyway, you get the point. The whole thing is, we know that fathers make a massive difference in the lives of their daughters. We know that a strong husband can make a massive difference in the lives of their wives. This is important because even though the film portrays men as part of the problem, you can't help but wonder if a strong man would have been a good thing for Gloria and Sasha. Nonetheless, we move on. Barbie, Gloria, and Sasha, they arrive in Barbie land only to find that the patriarchy has taken over. Now, this is one of those parts of the film that is very funny if you have an ironic sense of humor, because a lot of conservative commentators, and even I've seen some people who aren't that conservative, say that the film is accidentally conservative in this manner because this part of the film is so bad that it almost makes you think that Greta Gerwig was trying to portray the patriarchy as being better than the matriarchy. Of course, she wasn't. But the point is, the patriarchy here, it seems like, is better than the matriarchy. So the women are happy. The men are happy. They watch movies together. They're in romantic relationships together. The women are serving the men food and beer, and they're the cheerleaders, and now the men are playing. The men own all of the homes instead of the Barbies. You get the picture. But the Barbies, they can't do anything about it. So Barbie herself has kind of a meltdown. Gloria and Sasha, they eventually decide that they need to take Barbie to Weird Barbie and help her out. And eventually, through a long discussion, they determine that the best way to help all of these other Barbies snap out of enjoying the patriarchy is to convince them that they are brainwashed. Yes, that is how the Barbies are going to overcome the patriarchy, is to convince these Barbies who are enjoying themselves that in fact they are brainwashed. So how are they going to do this? Well, Gloria comes up with this great speech. And by great speech, I mean absolutely terrible speech. It's a speech that you can use your imagination. If you had a fourth wave feminist who hated the world and hated men, describing the state of women in America today, that's the speech. And so she'll say things like, you have to be thin, but not too thin. You have to achieve success, but you can't do it in such a way that you would violate society's prescribed definitions of femininity. You must dedicate yourself to motherhood, but you must not make it your whole life. Now, of course, I have no idea who says that you must not make motherhood your whole life. Everybody I know says that being a mother is the most important thing they can do. That is a mother already, and men that I know say the same thing. I guess sometimes there are fourth wave feminists who say that womanhood shouldn't be your whole life. But anyway, that's not the main point right now. These aren't exact quotes. Again, I didn't take notes, but they get to the gist of what's being told to the Barbies. Essentially, the Barbies have to be convinced that to be a woman in the patriarchy is paradoxical. It is oppressive. It is unfair to the women. And the only way that you could enjoy the patriarchy as a woman is if you are, in fact, brainwashed. And so that's exactly what they convince these Barbies of, that they are brainwashed. I'll stop here one more time to say I simply don't see the merit in any of these arguments that Gloria gives in her speech and that they subsequently tell to the Barbies individually to help them overcome the patriarchy. Even if we gave the validity, we granted validity to all of these statements that Gloria makes, and I certainly don't. Maybe there is some truth to some of these statements, obviously, but many of them are over-exaggerated and they are often just claims of victimhood in my mind. But let's say I'm wrong. Let's say that everything she said was true. Would that prove that women are oppressed by a patriarchy? No, it would not. And this is perhaps the crux of the film, because the entire film, the presupposition is that there is an oppressive patriarchy. That's why it's considered to be an effective political message for the left, a win for the left in the culture war, is because of this one premise. The premise is, well, obviously there's massive amounts of systemic sexism in our society, and it has to be overcome, and Barbie gets to the heart of that matter. But if you undercut that premise, that presupposition, the whole movie makes no sense, which obviously is why the whole movie makes no sense. The premise is that if any of these things are true, then there is a patriarchy that oppresses women. But in fact, there's not. Do women have some difficulties in life? Yes, they do. So do men. Men could do the same thing that Gloria does in this speech that she gives. Men could say something like, well, they want us to be tall, even though we can't control how tall we are. They could say something like they want us to be masculine, but not too masculine, because that would be toxic masculinity. We have to be masculine to a very limited degree and in a very certain limited way. That's how we have to be masculine. Or a man could say something like, we have to make good money, but we can't work too many hours and be away from the family too long. Men could say all of these things. Some of them would be overgeneralizations. Some of them would have some truth to them, and some would be somewhat at least based on data. Would any of that prove that men are oppressed by women? No, it would not. It might prove that men have some difficulties, maybe even have some legitimate complaints against women. Women certainly could prove at some points that they have legitimate complaints against men. Men could even point to the system. They could say there are systemic problems with modern society. They could say things like they are a majority of suicide victims. Men could say that they are a vast majority of work-related deaths. Women initiate a majority of divorces in America, right at around 70%. So would any of this prove that women oppress men? No. That is the key point to all of this. None of this proves a patriarchy, and none of this proves a matriarchy. At most, it proves that men and women have difficulties in life, and sometimes those difficulties look different, and sometimes they may even be legitimate complaints against the opposite sex, but that is a far cry from proving oppression or systemic oppression or patriarchy or matriarchy or any of it. Doesn't prove any of it. The truth is, contrary to this film, men and women need each other for fulfillment and for purpose. We need women and women need us. And that is simply the truth. That is God's creative design. That is natural law. That is nature. That is whatever you want to call it. Men and women need one another. No matter how much trash films like this Barbie film will try to convince young women and young men, as a result of what they're saying to women, that they don't need each other. It's nonsensical. It cuts against nature. And it's wrong. And we should tell young people that it's wrong. Women need men. Men need women. We are all in this together, and we complement one another nicely. If we'll just stop being so narcissistic and complaining all of the time, then perhaps we could get somewhere. When the Barbies hear this supposed proof that they are living under a lie, that they are brainwashed by the patriarchy, they snap out of it. Just like that, they realize who they really are as empowered women, which leads you to the next question. Is this film trying to say that the matriarchy is better than the patriarchy? You see, some people who have tried to offer a positive egalitarian interpretation of the film have completely missed this. The Barbies, when they are snapped out of their brainwashing, they don't go and try to establish an equal egalitarian society. They try to reestablish the matriarchy, maybe with the caveat that there is a small level of influence that the men can have, the Kens can have, and maybe one day the Kens could have the kind of influence that they do presently in Barbie Land. Even if this hope of the Kens eventually having power one day, even if that could prove some level of egalitarianism, it's still not true, because the Barbies enjoy the matriarchy while the Kens are miserable in the matriarchy. But the Barbies do not enjoy the patriarchy because they're brainwashed. So the patriarchy, if you enjoy that as a woman, it's a result of cultish brainwashing. But if you enjoy the matriarchy, then you are in your right mind and you are rational. That means that implicitly the film is saying that things would be better if women were in charge. And obviously, that's nothing new for fourth wave feminists. They'll say things like, men have been in charge long enough, it's our turn, and stupid stuff like that. So the film, even though it does give Ken some semblance of hope, perhaps for a sequel in the future, I'm sure we'll get one since it made so much money, it does not change the fact that the matriarchy was perceived as being logical and coherent, while the patriarchy was cultish. And you could only enjoy it if you were brainwashed. So, is the message egalitarian? No, it is feminist. There is an important distinction. We'll get to that in just a minute. So, how do the Barbies, once they are snapped out of their brainwashed states, how do they take back the government? Well, you see, in the patriarchy, now the Kens and the Barbies have romantic relationships with one another. And the Barbies are going to use that against the Kens, because the Kens don't know that they've been snapped out of their brainwashed state, supposedly. So the Barbies make the Kens think that they're cheating on them. And when they do that, it distracts the Kens. It causes the Kens to go to war with one another. And while they're at war with one another, the Barbies then go and take back the government and re-implement the matriarchy. And now Barbie Land is back to normal. In the end, Ken and Barbie, they face each other. After everything is restored, everybody's kind of reconciling together at the end. And Barbie and Ken, they face one another. And they both apologize. To be fair, Ken apologizes, Barbie apologizes. Barbie says that every night shouldn't have been girls' night. We should have included you more and all this stuff. So, yes, there is apology, but the key to the ending is not the apology. It's then, what is the solution? Because Ken and Barbie both realize that, okay, we've done all this now. We have to find purpose. We have to have meaning. Where do we go from here? And Ken wants to be in a relationship with Barbie. That's Ken's idea of finding purpose and meaning. But obviously, in the Barbie film in 2023, this cannot be the source of a woman's fulfillment. A woman cannot find fulfillment. She doesn't need to find fulfillment in a man. She doesn't need a man. She doesn't need to start a family. She doesn't need kids. She just needs herself. And that's the message of the film. Barbie tells Ken, you got to figure yourself out. You got to find your own hobbies. You got to find your own identity. You have to find purpose within yourself. And she says that she herself has to do the same. She has to go her separate ways from Ken. Her answer for purpose and fulfillment is not in a relationship, but it is in herself. That's the message of the film. Reiterates some of the anti-motherhood subtleties. Again, telling young girls they don't need a man. They don't need a relationship to find fulfillment. They don't need kids to find a fulfillment. All that stuff. Maybe it'll come around later. Maybe it won't. Who knows? Who cares? All you really need is you. You and your happiness. That's good enough. That's the message. That's the message of the ending. So Barbie then, she goes and she talks to the ghost of Ruth Handler one more time. Remember, the founder of the fascist and sexualized capitalistic legacy of Barbie. She talks with her, says she wants to become a human. They play this role of what's supposed to be homemade tapes of little girls and their moms playing with daughters and with Barbies and whatnot. It's supposed to be a nostalgic trip for the moms and the daughters for whom the movie was intended, obviously. And it's at that point that Barbie then says, okay, I want to be a woman. And so she becomes a woman. It's at this point that everyone in the audience who is incapable of critical thought, putting together an argument, and is susceptible to argumentation that is not based at all in empirical data or logical consistency, they begin to cry. My wife and I were in the theater, and these college girls were sitting behind us in this absolutely packed theater on the second weekend. And they were saying that they had cried 3 times in the movie. God help us. They thought the movie was powerful. It was emotional. The arguments were great. And they are now empowered to go fight the patriarchy. Ruth tells Barbie she can be a human. Barbie says, great. And basically at the very end, Barbie becomes a human. She's with Gloria and Sasha and the doofus dad again, and he's portrayed as an idiot one more time. And Barbie then goes to what looks like is going to be a job interview, but is really just an appointment with her gynecologist. So to be a woman, to find out who you really are as a woman, I guess you go see the woman doctor, which is kind of ironic because it's transphobic, quote unquote. There was a man who played one of the Barbies with a super deep voice. If you watch the movie, you know who it is because he's obviously the one with a man voice. Transphobic. Greta Gerwig didn't think that one through. To be a real woman, you have to have woman parts. So anyway, kind of humorous there. The ending of the film, again, it emphasizes the important point, and this is where we'll end the review. It emphasizes the point that men and women don't need each other. And this is one of the reasons that I've engaged in this hour-plus review. It's one of the reasons that a lot of conservatives have not been happy with the film. No, it's not because we're triggered or we're miserable or anything like that. I personally don't care what Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie think about men and women. They have their own thoughts. They're not exactly great thinkers, as has been evidenced by the film. Their ability to put together a logically coherent argument from beginning to end is suspect, at least after watching this. And so what they think, who cares? They're famous and rich, and they don't care what I think either, and so it's fine. But the problem is that millions and millions of young girls went and saw this film, and they took it to heart. See, I know there's some conservatives out there and some that are kind of indifferent who say, nah, don't get too worked up over it. They think that everybody's just seeing through this nonsense, but I promise you they're not. There are millions of young girls who felt empowered by the film, who thought that the film was great. It gave them a sense of purpose and something to strive for, happiness within themselves, not a man, not a relationship, not pregnancy or children or anything like that. Themselves, that's what they need. And this is what culture tells women over and over and over again. And it is devastating the fabric of our society. That's why we care. That's why I care. I have kids that have to grow up in this world. I have kids that have to grow up in a world where I can't even turn on the cartoons. I can't turn on live TV for them anymore. Last time we had Blue's Clues on with my daughter and son, was it last year or 2 years ago? Something like that. Not quite 2 years ago. And a drag queen pops up, Blue's Clues. I'm like, I used to watch Blue's Clues and nothing like that ever happened. You can't watch TV anymore. You can't take your daughter to a Barbie movie without hearing this trash. So that's why we care. Our kids are going to grow up in this world and we want to fight this. We don't want our kids to have to grow up in this world. And so we have to challenge messages like we see in Barbie. So to conclude, is this movie carrying a message of equality and egalitarianism, or is it carrying a message of modern feminism? Well, the answer is clearly that it's carrying the message of modern feminism. Why? Well, an egalitarian movie would perhaps tell the daughters at the beginning of the film that they can be mothers, but they also could be doctors and lawyers and presidents and whatever else. A feminist message would tell those same girls that they should be other things before they're mothers. That being a doctor or a lawyer or a mother is better than being a mother. And in fact, you should just take that baby doll and slam its head against the rocks. You don't need it. You need to be a doctor. You need to be a lawyer. Those are the things you need. You just need yourself, really. You don't need babies. You don't need children. That's what a feminist message would say. That's what a feminist film would say. An egalitarian message would tell men and women that they need to work together. A feminist message would tell men and women that the matriarchy is superior to the patriarchy. A feminist message would tell men and women that they should just hate each other. In fact, Sasha does say that in the film at one point, that men and women just hate each other in the real world, and there's never really a remedy or a rebuttal that's offered to that statement. So it seems like it just stands. That's what a feminist message would tell men and women, that they should hate each other instead of working together. An egalitarian message, at least one that's rooted in some semblance of natural law, would tell men and women that they depend on one another for their fulfillment and purpose. A feminist message would again say that men and women do not need each other. They do not need one another for fulfillment. They're essentially the same, and that they should go their separate ways more often than not. That's what a feminist message would say, and that's exactly what we get here. An egalitarian message would say that we need one another. We complement one another. We were designed to be together. And life is much easier for men and for women if they have a partner that was created and designed to be with them. If a masculine man has a feminine woman that complements him, and a feminine woman has a masculine man that complements her, then they will both be better off. Kids are better off if they have a mother and a father in the household. There are certain masculine traits about a household that are needed for kids and the adults, and there are certain feminine traits that are needed within a household. Kids need comfort and they need discipline. And mothers and fathers do a much better job of those things if they do them together in conjunction with one another. This is nature. This is natural law. This is God's created order, whatever we want to call it. And it's the message that we should give to people. We should not give people the message of Barbie. And so with that, this movie review, this lengthy, deep dive into Barbie is officially over. I appreciate you all turning in to watch. If you enjoyed this, I would appreciate it if you liked and subscribed to our channel. If you want additional content, check out our website. The link is in the description below. We offer political commentary, social commentary, theological podcasts, and of course, more movie reviews like this one. So this has been a production of the Aletheia Initiative, and we hope to see you next time.